is just a little bit above that. In many ways, what LEED is doing less bad, right? We're just trying to minimize our environmental impacts. And then kind of in the middle here, it would maybe be referred to as a sustainable building, right? So sustainability implies that you can keep doing the same thing over and over again. And on balance, you're not doing additional harm, right? So maybe you're doing a bunch of good and you're doing a little bit of harm and they offset each other and you've got this neutral kind of steady state situation that can be sustained for a long period of time. A lot of folks in this business though say that's actually all not very interesting to try and pursue and not all that useful in the long term. So really what we need to do, if we're going to function as a species with the other living systems on this planet, is we need to develop our systems so that it actually augments living systems. So kind of the next step up might be restorative design. So restorative design, right, is restorations, it's right, trying to restore what was there at a certain point. And you can do that with buildings, but you can also do that with natural systems. A lot of folks would say, well, why is that really the end-worthiest goal? Really what it should be about is it should be about life itself. So how can we design our projects that not only, say, restore natural systems to a higher level of functionality, but how can we design our projects so that we can actually regenerate additional life? That's what natural systems do. They don't restore themselves to a particular steady state condition that occurred in the past, because there's a lot of parameters that have changed since that period. So with regenerative design, what you're trying to do is design your project so it actually augments life. So it creates additional habitat. So say more species show up on your site than used to be there. That's the idea of regenerating additional life. So in many ways what the system's trying to do is trying to head people more towards the regenerative type approach as opposed to the doing less bad kind of approach. So basically the way this system works, they call it a challenge, and we're working on a couple projects right now, and I can tell you it certainly is a challenge. So you're really asked to kind of push the envelope with the system. In many ways, the market has caught up to LEED. You can do pretty much a LEED Gold project without doing a whole lot different than the status quo market provides normally. So this system is really trying to push the envelope, trying to lay down this challenge. And I believe to this point, it's been around for about 4 or 5 years, there are 3 projects that have met the entire challenge. So it is a much more difficult system that's really trying to push the envelope. So there are really only 2 rules. One is the system is comprised of imperatives. So LEED references prerequisites and credits. So this system calls them imperatives. There are 20 imperatives. And basically, if you meet each one of the imperatives, then you earn the Living Building Challenge. There's no points. There's no differentiating between prerequisites and credits. Basically, everything's a prerequisite. So you must do each one of these things in order to meet the challenge. And the other thing that they base this on, it's all based on actual performance data, not on any kind of projections. So like in LEED, you do an energy model to kind of predict what your building might perform like in the future. In this system, it's all based on your actual performance. So that means you typically have to wait at least a year post-occupancy in order to evaluate the project for this system. So it can basically, the system can be applied at different scales to different kinds of projects. So it certainly can be applied to renovations and new buildings. It can also be applied to landscapes and infrastructures, and even at the neighborhood scale. So the way that a lot of the imperatives work, it's based on these living transects. So those of you who are familiar with the New Urbanist philosophies and ideas will probably recognize these transects. What's missing from this list? make you think early in the morning?
Suburbs.
Suburbs, right. So there's no suburb here. So what the system actually encourages you to try and do is, if you are doing a project in a suburb, they would say that the highest and best use of kind of suburban development is to go one way or the other, right? Is to either go back to agriculture or become more urban, right? So the system is actually set up to try and discourage suburban development and encourage those kind of developments going one way or the other. So the requirements will vary depending upon where your project is located. Then they also include this concept of scale jumping. So they actually encourage you, for a lot of these imperatives, to think beyond your project boundary. One of the key kind of principles behind green building in general would be to think about what you're doing and how it impacts other systems. So not only other living systems, but other human systems, how it impacts the transportation system, how it impacts the watershed, right, so on and so forth. Trying to think at larger scales than just narrowly focusing on your individual project. So they do encourage scale jumping, so there are strategies you might want to take a look at that would be, say, community-wide strategies that can help your particular project, or vice versa. So they encourage you to kind of jump that project boundary and jump that scale to think about solutions to meeting the imperatives. And that's a difficult to read probably slide, but it shows you some of the imperatives and the ones they encourage scale jumping. So these are the imperatives over here on the right. Just like LEED, the system is arranged in categories, and most of those categories look very familiar until we get down to the end here, and then they're a little different. But those are each one of the imperatives that we're going to talk about. So we start with the site category. So this one looks pretty familiar. There's some similarities to LEED in this respect. There are certain certain locations that they discourage you from developing on, and essentially require that you develop on previously developed land. So going out and plopping it on a green field is certainly discouraged. I think there are systems where you can actually put it on a green field, but you have to meet some pretty stringent requirements. So trying to discourage the sprawl type development. One of the unique requirements in this system, and we've done this on a lot of our projects, is they actually require you to do an ecological site assessment. So to actually bring a biologist or a botanist or some level of expertise to evaluate the flora and fauna on the site to see if you can identify what's high value and what's not high value, and use that information to kind of inform the development. I'll give you a quick project example from a project we worked on. It was a border crossing station between New York and Canada, and the designers looked at the site, and there was a bunch of site that was green. It had some trees growing up and things like that. And there was another large section of the site that was gravelly and rocky and so on and so forth. And the designers, the architects and engineers, had decided, well, we want to be green here, right? We want to save the green stuff, and so we should build a building on the gravelly, rocky part of the site. So bring in a team of botanists and folks to take a look at it. It turns out all the green stuff was shrubby, invasive species that were actually harming habitat there, and all the high-value habitat was in the rocky, gravelly area of the site. So to the untrained eye, one could make very wrong assumptions about where the best place to put the building is. So you really need to, they require you in this system to do this kind of ecological site assessment to make sure you understand the issues associated with that, associated with your project.
Is that a part of the environmental impact study?
It is, I believe, as I understand an environmental impact study, it is not a requirement to do an ESA to do this kind of assessment. So this would be above and beyond what would be required in typical ESA. Second credit here is for urban